Welcome to this edition of another policy briefing from the American Policy Roundtable. Good evening. I'm Dave Zanotti, CEO of the American Policy Roundtable, and we'd like to welcome all of you who are here for our very first time. Joining me is Rob Walgate, both the vice president of this organization and the project manager for iVoters.com. Also producing for us this evening is Alan Duncan, and the balance of our staff is waiting at their computers not only for your questions, but for us to mess this up. so stay tuned. It'll get better. All right. Rob, you've got the questions that have been coming in this evening, and the theme for what we're really talking about is what to expect. But before we get into what to expect, let's talk about the getup. You want Mr. Rogers on us.
Well, that was for the producer, Alan C. Duncan. I know,
Okay.
Big Mr. Rogers fan. So
Okay.
first time I put the sweater on, it's my wife Rachel said her.
You wore that last year at Christmas in America
My
too,
wife-
I think. Yeah, it was a Christmas present.
She wants to know if I'm trying to, be like Mr. Rogers. I said in some ways, absolutely.
But the T-shirt underneath is the
T-shirt
moment.
underneath, yeah.
Okay, so this is a blatant and shameless commercial plug.
100%. 100%. iVoters.com. If you haven't been there yet, visit soon.
It would look like this.
It would look like that, exactly like
Right
that.
behind us is an actual live internet screen of iVoters.com. And all you do is enter your street address and your zip code and hit find your ballot, and up will pop your races from the State House to the White House in all 50 states where you're watching this evening or later this week or next week. You'll find it. So iVoters, and this is just some of the beginning pieces of this. We'll get to it a little bit more in just a minute. But first, why are we doing this event? We're doing it because this is kind of like a staff meeting. There's 3 of us in the room. When we have a staff meeting on Monday, there could be 7, 8, 9 of us in the room, and some people coming in from the offices from around the country. We have a grave concern. And being in the public policy business for 40 years, having worked in so many states, on so many projects, witnessing so many campaigns, being on the streets, registering voters, gathering petitions, talking to people at the polls, we have a profound love for the process of voting and for the American electorate. We love Election Day, and we love what happens. Voting is one of the ways that we express that we love our neighbor. It's one of the ways that we share the common responsibility to defend our form of civil government. It's one of the ways we help carry the load for folks in our neighborhood and in our community. It couldn't be more important. And when something comes in the way that has the potential of threatening what's going on with the election, we get nervous. And right now, we think we are about to face a moment of history that may not be so friendly. You remember back in 2000 when the entire presidential election hung on 537 votes being counted in Florida. And for days and days and then weeks we didn't know. And how you'd come home every day and first thing you want to know is what happened.
Well, and back in 2000, you think of the technology and social media wasn't around the way it is. That can you imagine 2000 with social media being as prevalent as it is today?
Yeah, you come home, turn on the television, you're glued to the radio. Who's the president? We're here to tell you that based on research, based on working with people we have relationships with over 40 years who are well positioned and whom we have confidence with. We're not going to give you names. I can just tell you that the sources that we have worked through are telling us a problem is coming. Now, it's not a crisis. It's just going to feel like one.
Well, Americans, we're ones, we enjoy delayed gratification, right? We're a patient bunch. We don't need everything right now at our fingertips. So we may have to wait a few days after November 3rd.
Because of our heightened expectations with social media and digital technology, we expect to push a button, get an answer, push a button, get an answer. And what's going to happen on election night? We're not going to get a clear count from a number of states. Most likely, we will not have a clear enough count to even begin to imagine who has won the White House. And it's important for people to know that now. It's very important for us to begin to change our expectations. For years, the business consultant was doing a great work around the country by the name of Bob Beal. He may still be in business. I've actually lost touch with him, but I went to a couple of his seminars over the years, and this was one of those guys who you pay a lot of money to have him give you a couple of things you never forget. And one of the things I never forgot was his maxim that all arguments are the results of differing expectations. All arguments are the result of differing expectations. Therefore, it's critically important in leadership to manage expectations. Now, there's a fine line between managing expectations and attempting to manipulate people. And if you feel at any time throughout this presentation we're trying to manipulate you, please forgive us, because that's not the intention. We want you to be advised of the fact that we are most likely not going to know on election night who won the presidency, because the states are not going to be able to process the volume of mail-in ballots that are coming in right now in time for a call on election night. Now, I can give you one substantiated media report that validates this categorically, and that's that recently Frank LaRose, the Secretary of State of Ohio, out loud in an exclusive interview with Fox News said he does not expect Ohio to be able to certify their count for at least 3 weeks after November 3rd.
Yeah, he said if it's close, it may take 3 weeks or longer to have the certified. And Ohio is a state, and I think it's important to know that all states, their election laws, those are state laws on how they process ballots, how they deal with absentee voting, how they deal with early voting. And some states allow for them to count votes as they're received. Mm-hmm. Others do not.
Or it's and some permit you to process.
Yes.
Permits the boards of elections to process those mail-in ballots, but not count them. All right. But in any case, there's different stages, and then some states you can't touch them until election day.
Right. You're not permitted to open them and even start the process. Pennsylvania is one of those states. Wisconsin is one of those states.
Michigan gives you, they just passed a law to fix this. They said, we'll give you 10 extra hours.
Yeah.
Right?
They're giving an extra day.
Yeah. So now, why is that a problem? It's simple math.
Yes.
The sources that we're working with are telling us that in larger states particularly, the volume is running twice the 2016 level of mail-in ballots. Twice. Okay, so you'd say, wait a minute, if I've got 1 million in 2016, I've now got an anticipated number coming in of 2 million. How long does it take to open the envelopes, read the material, validate the signature, open the interior envelope, scan the ballot before you're permitted to count it? Right? That's a couple of minutes to be doing it legitimately.
It is going to take time, and we also can't be mistaken. In a number of states, you're permitted a week or even longer for ballots to arrive as long as they're postmarked the day before election day or election day in some states. So there's still going to be ballots coming in. They can't even start to count.
So we've got two issues here. Your local board of elections and the Secretary of State in your state. And those people are straight up. This is not a conspiracy.
Right.
We're not accusing anyone of anything but trying to do their job in a very difficult situation because of COVID-19, because of the fear that's been generated. Now people are afraid to go vote. All right. Now, whether that fear is legitimate or not, drop that for a second. If you've listened to the public square, you know we've got some opinions about that. But look, fine, let that go. It doesn't matter. You still have the problem. People are mailing them in at twice the level of before, so you've got to make some changes in expectations. This is not a conspiracy. Secondly, you got the post office. In spite of the history of Newman and everything else, we're not going to play the game of blaming anybody. Everyone is innocent until proven guilty. We're talking about legitimate agencies attempting to do their job at twice the volume without being able to increase their staffing and hours on the clock. The legislatures aren't giving them more time. The time they've got is the time they've got. My goodness, we're about to go inside 20 days on this election. By the time some of you are looking at this, we might be right on the election.
Well, and some people may say, how did we get to this point? Remember, we were talking about this in March and April when people were canceling primaries. States were moving them, saying, and we looked at each other and said, well, if that's happening now,
what's the precedent?
It's going to be a major problem come November because you're going to run into the same issues. So what are you doing about it? As a General Assembly, as a state legislature, what provisions have been made? And as you mentioned, well, Michigan gave themselves
10
a
days.
few extra hours.
Ohio, to their credit, saved up some of the COVID federal money they got to move that money into local boards of elections and to increase their infrastructure capacity, and millions of dollars they moved in. Good for them. We're not sure what every other state has done, but how big is the story? We broke it 4 days on the public square before Fox got their exclusive from Ohio today. The New York Times broke the story.
The New York Times put out a chart today, and I've been referencing a lot, and it shows you how absentee ballots can be pre-processed, if you will, in each state. And it talks about whether they can be done upon receipt, and there's states they call swing states. There's 4 that allow for that, swing states. There's 6 that are allowed before Election Day. It gives a time frame of when they can start, but on Election Day, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, they can start opening the envelopes
on Election Day.
On Election
and Michigan
Day.
Only the day before. So let's take a look at a slide that gives you the states. There's 10 of them in particular that we're watching and that you should be aware of on election night, understanding that these states are going to have some significant trouble because of their volume and their counting capacity. Now, again, remember, please, we haven't intimated a scandal. We're not talking about voter fraud. We're just talking about time on task. All right. So those 10 states are the ones to be watching.
Yeah, be watching. And I think a lot of people may be watching and thinking, well, yes, those are ones that we need to watch when it comes to the Electoral College.
Right.
But it means far more than that.
Well, and let's just pretend. Let's take a look at the New York Times piece now. And New York Times has got this in little boxes. And see, they're already trying to set people's expectations and set up the networks, because we do election coverage for ivoters.com on a number of major radio stations around the country. And of course, everyone's getting ready now for election coverage. So the producers are telling us, well, what are we going to do? And I say, I don't know. How do you cover? Okay, here we are. Blow all the horns and the trumpet music, but we got nothing to tell you.
Well, I remember the coverage that I did in 2016. That we were there till 5 a.m.
I turned you off at 4 a.m. I couldn't take it anymore.
We were on till 5 a.m. and I got a text from the station manager saying, "Hey, 7 to midnight," and I thought, well, I may be there till like December 1st. So, it may be a little bit longer this go round.
We don't know how long it's going to take. All right. Now let's turn to the questions of the law, and hang on for a second, and we're going to put a slide up on this, because the logical question then comes: okay, so, we've got expectation change. It's going to take a while. It may take all of November. Heck, it may take all of December. Well, there's only 78 days between November 3rd and Inauguration Day on January 20th. Here's a question. How long would it take you to count 2 million pieces of paper? It's okay. You say, well, but see, here's the problem. It's not just processing them through a machine. It's all the steps you have to take to process legitimately and legally. And then the presumption is that they all got to you by Election Day, and there's not 100,000 that show up on the 5 days after the election, all postmarked correctly.
Correct. And you talked earlier, not being a conspiracy theorist, not saying someone has an alternative agenda, but remember, mistakes happen as well. In Ohio, just this week when ballots were sent out, 50,000 voters received the wrong ballot. So mistakes happen during the process as well. Yeah. So how are we accounting for that to be built in? It's not going to be fun.
You don't want to hear oops anywhere along this process. And we've already got some of those. Okay, now let's take a look at the next scenario, the one that the New York Times is probably not willing to talk about out loud yet, but it's coming. And we have, again, vetted this with some of the best legal minds that we know, people we've actually worked on developing cases that went the whole way to the Supreme Court and were won. People who are good lawyers, who understand a lot about election law. We've been blessed to know some of those people along the years, and for some crazy reason they wanted to stay friends with us. And so we're able to talk to them. People with the highest level of experience in this arena. So we put up a theory, and then we bounced it off of all of them, and they started to laugh at us. In fact, a couple of them laughed out loud saying, well, you read so-and-so's paper. No, I never read his paper. Or you talked to so-and-so. No, we just sat down. Okay, so we kind of got a meeting the minds. Let's look at the dates. Let's look at the law. In fact, before we go to the dates, let's look at the law. Here's the law. Let's presume that we get to a period of time where you cannot get these ballots counted, where it's going on and on and on. What kind of trouble might that put us in? And I want to set up, we've got the law slide up now. There are 3 pieces of law that we want to consider and we'll be talking about. There's 2 constitutional amendments, the 12th and the 20th in the U.S. Constitution, particularly Amendment 20, Section 3. And then there is the U.S. Code 3. United States Code 3, that was passed in 1947. Now, the first thing to remember about law is the Constitution is, in essence, the ultimate authority in our country. That's why our country starts off with the words, we the people. This is the law, we said, is our highest law in the land. So the Constitution is superior to statutory law. U.S. Code is a statute. State laws are statutes. So when it comes to a federal election, what the Constitution says is the predicate, if you will, to anything that the Congress has already passed in law. So the Constitution comes first. There's a thing in the Constitution called an unqualified presidential election. What do you mean by an unqualified presidential election? What it means is that not that the president died or the vice president died before they could be inaugurated, but that you weren't able to get the ballots counted. And because you couldn't get the ballots counted in a number of states, that meant that you couldn't get a report to the Electoral College of those electoral votes and which way they went, candidate A or B. So do you just say, well, you guys didn't get your homework done, we'll just pick a president from what's left? No, because to become the president of the United States, you must get 270 votes or electors in the Electoral College. And if a state is off the board, then nobody gets them. This is why we've been saying for years, a really bright person running for the presidency as an independent could throw the Electoral College into a tie by winning just 3 or 4 states, which then triggers the 12th Amendment, which means Congress then picks who the president would be.
Yeah, an independent would have that ability if they win those 3 or 4 states, not to win 270 themselves, but prevent someone from getting to 270.
Right.
That being the goal, and it would create...
Then that moves the race to a vote by the Congress. And now, I'm explaining this to you because this part almost everybody knows about. Now we're going to take it completely off the table because this is not that. All right? So let's have the New York Times is going to have a blast trying to do this in writing. It's almost impossible to write this. You got to talk it out. Okay? So this is not that.
No.
This is not a tie or the inability for the top 3 candidates to secure 270 because the Constitution says then they would pick from the top 3. Not the case. This is a case where we don't know what the counts are, so we don't have a completed Electoral College vote. It's an unqualified presidential election. Now what do you do? Okay. Amendment 20, Section 3 says if you have a unqualified presidential election, that Congress shall select the acting president.
Which body?
Doesn't say.
Right.
House or Senate. It just says Congress shall select.
Well, they get along so well, so it should be a very smooth process.
I see no arguments coming there.
There's nothing to disagree about.
Which is an interesting caveat or side note because when the Constitution was framed, the people who served in Congress held one another in such high esteem and held their jobs in such high esteem that they really did think if we couldn't get it straight on the votes because something happened, Congress would fix this in the best interest of the country. That's because when they put this together, political parties didn't run the world.
Well, and the founders talked about them as being factions that would be more divisive than they would be unifying.
So move fast forward to 2020, and why do we have a non-qualified presidential election? Because Ohio is 3 weeks behind, and Pennsylvania and Michigan are heaven knows how many weeks behind, and we only have 78 days, and now 21 are gone. Are they going to be able to get it done before the inauguration? And this is just on counts. This is just on, not this. This isn't even on recounts, because some states have automatic recounts as well.
And you talked about the inauguration, but January 3rd is another date that comes into play.
We're going to get there in just 1 second. So this is the non-qualified election where we don't have the ability to get the votes counted. So what then happens is this. Congress shall decide. Now, in 1947, Congress passed a statute in U.S. Code 3 stating that the line of succession of the presidency would also apply if we had a non-qualified presidential election. We couldn't get the votes counted. So there's a statute that says automatically, we don't have a president, we don't have a vice president, January 20th comes up, there's nobody in the seat, automatically the Speaker of the House becomes President of the United States as acting president. So the Constitution gives Congress the authority to select. In 1947, Congress chose this as a mechanism. The line of succession would apply to the situation. But That's a law. And the Congress of 2020 can change the law from 1947 in a day, in a snap. They can say, that was good then. We don't think this case applies. We've got another idea on how we might go about this. So they could change that. So somebody who says automatically it's the Speaker of their House, well, that's if Congress doesn't decide to do something else. And since we've got votes that can't be certified at a federal level of an election, that means that perhaps members of Congress and the Senate can't be certified either as being the victors because we don't know the final count on their races as well. So we can't jump too quickly. The rails are lined up for it to be the acting president or Speaker of the House, but they could switch the track. So,
because constitutional language trumps statutory
Right.
language, and statutory language can be changed at any time by Congress.
there you go. That's why when Hillary Clinton says to Joe Biden, no matter what, do not concede the election, we're not even finished yet with the options if we get to a place where we can't get the votes counted. Now, we would not be sounding the alarm unless we were actually convinced that might actually happen. Because remember, we've got states telling us now they're going to be 3 weeks delayed, at least 21 days delayed in a 78-day cycle. But that 78-day cycle is now about to close in. Let's look at the timeline. Here's the way a presidential election works. Presidential election works like this. On November the 3rd, the voting ends. On November 3, the voting ends. Okay? But you can still collect votes.
It's different in each state. Some states allow 10 days after the election for votes to come in, some a week, some a day.
But they have to be postmarked?
They have to be postmarked by election day. Again, that varies in states. Some may be the day before. So each state is in charge with their own election law when it comes to that.
Okay. December the 8th is what's called Safe Harbor Day. The presumption of Safe Harbor Day is that all the states have got all their counting done by December the 8th. And then they send to the Congress the slate of electors. We said we've certified our election. It's signed by our governor. This candidate won, and this many electors from our state are now pledged to that candidate. And if they get their homework done by the 8th and all their counts are done, Congress cannot challenge that slate of electors. The Constitution gives the Congress the ability to challenge a slate of electors if they think something went wrong in the state. So December 8th is a critical day for this to go smoothly, because what comes right in behind that is December 14th, 6 days later. Back in the states, the electors actually have a meeting. The Electoral College meets. It meets in 50 separate meetings in each of the states, and they basically out loud in a meeting, recorded with their minutes, announced the vote counts and the fact that we are the electors, our candidate won, send our votes to Congress.
Because when you vote for President of the United States, you're voting not necessarily, I mean, you are voting for the individual, but
Right.
You're voting for the electors
Right.
to elect the individual.
Right. So there's a multiple step process. And by and large, most people don't know this happens because it's kind of a detail. It never has been a problem. And this isn't where the source of the problem would be, this particular meeting. This goes on all the time. But again, if we don't have the counts done by December 14th, then how can that Electoral College meeting be held? And now we're past the Safe Harbor Day. So what might cause that to happen? Now we're to the realm where we've gone past best intentions, difficult job. Now we're in the question of both recounts, and we're in the situation of frauds and legal challenges.
Yeah, you can look at a number of things. I mean, folks that have requested absentee ballots in some states, well, then they decide they don't want to fill out that absentee ballot, so they may go to the polls on election day and decide to vote. Well, that all has to be cross-referenced and checked by each state before they can certify counts. That's not an easy process when you have some states requesting upwards of 2 million absentee ballots. What if you don't get them all back? What if those people show up at the polls? You have to double check all that.
What if the states that are cross-referencing people with multiple addresses discover a pattern at one university or 2 or 3 universities where college students decided to vote in more than one place?
Or what about people that received ballots in error and then they received the correct ballot, send back the ballot in error, but then they want to make sure they send the correct one in, so they send them both in, not even being intentional to fraud.
And then what about ballots that are damaged, ballots that come in from overseas, military ballots, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? There are a lot of things. Now,
This sounds fun.
yeah. And that's before someone questions whether or not there was ever any fraud in the process. And pray to God that there isn't. And when we talk about fraud, we're talking about people doing the wrong thing intentionally. And we are not laying any blame on any board of elections, because the people that serve in the boards of elections, they're real patriots. They're willing to serve their community for a thankless job and not much money. And on election day, those dear people that are working at the polls, our volunteers are working for very little money just to serve their community. So there is no one accusing anybody of any bad intention. But if men were angels, we'd need no laws. And as Madison said, but men are not angels. And this is a highly contested environment that we're in. And so if something does go wrong and the political parties decide to take serious issues, then we could be in a position where just the legal proceedings alone take us down this timeline. And that brings us into January. Because by the time we get to January 3rd, the new Congress is seated. When that new Congress is seated, they have 3 days until January the 6th, at which time the Electoral College ballots have to be counted in Congress. And if the counts are not there and they cannot get to 270, then we have an unqualified election. And then we're in a situation where Congress can select the new president. Now, maybe between the 3rd and the 20th, we'll get a deliverance and somehow we're able to get all those pieces and parts together. Or maybe by that time, the party that has control of the legislative body of the Congress says, we got this. We don't really want to hear any more counts. We're going to pick the president because we can.
Well, and the question then becomes, if the ballots haven't been counted for the president, how does that impact the new Congress that convenes on January 3rd when you have 435 new members that are to be sworn in? So are those races certified? And a number of United States senators, 1/3 of the Senate, is to be sworn in that day.
So, just in case you were thinking about having a good night's sleep between now and the day of the inauguration, my guess is most all of us will say extra prayers tonight.
But why isn't anyone else talking about this? So is it the elephant in the room that no one wants to deal with because they don't want it to happen, so why discuss it?
It's really scary. If you're a major network, it blows up everything you've got in your time budgets, your allotments, your programming, and your advertising. You don't want to talk about it.
Makes commercials worth a little bit more 3 weeks after the election, maybe.
And if you're a campaign, you don't want to be talking about it. You don't want to show any signs of weakness. You don't want to scare people. Look, this is all very real. And this is a situation that is triggered with unintended consequences. And so often in history, that's what happens. An odd thing happens, and then another domino falls, and then the next thing you know, the house is on fire, and you go, how did that happen? And you go look back and go, wow, these things in history happen. And so by notifying people in advance, this gives us an opportunity to try and do something about it. So let's take a moment now. And we've got another slide up. But before we do, we got the what if slide. All right, let's do this. Since it's about time, let's take a commercial break. And rather than you clicking on anything, don't do that, because this commercial you actually want to see. Hopefully we can actually turn it on and make it work.
Oh, hello. Dr. Fred here from the Information Labs here at iVoters.com. It's time to vote again, you know, and just like last election and the one before that and all the way back to 1998, we are busy building out a simple website that can help. Yes, voting is simple. In fact, it's elementary, especially if you have the basic information about the candidates that will be on your ballot. Here at iVoters, we collect information on thousands of candidates and then boil it all down so that you can review many of the races that will be on your ballot, the one you will see on Election Day. It's fast, free, nonpartisan, and, well, the best way to show it all is simply by doing it. Just go to ivoters.com, insert your street address, and watch what happens. ivoters.com. When it comes to voting, it's elementary.
And welcome back to Little Rascals, radio and television. That's Dr. Fred from the iVoter Lab, and that is a good point for us to turn to the what do we do about this impending challenge to this republic. The first thing is don't panic. There are laws on the books that anticipate we could get into a situation like this. Now, I'm not vouching that we have lawmakers that have the integrity to get through this without it getting ugly, but we do have a track to run upon, both in the Constitution and in federal statutes. So we've got a good situation, and we've got a lot of good secretaries of state out there who are not going to sleep very much until this gets resolved. Rob, let's take a second and see what kind of questions are coming in before we go further into the question about iVoters.
You know, we had a question about ballot counts. Specifically, they referenced Ohio. How much time did it take to process in 2016? If we double the number of absentee ballots, can we expect that it'll be double the time to count them?
Yeah, I don't know the exact specifics on time flow charts, but we do know that Frank LaRose has already said he's anticipating right now an additional 3 weeks.
Yeah, if it's close, it's going to be 3 weeks, possibly more. And I think the thing would be, he talked about if it was close, and especially knowing how many requests they had come in, it's going to hinge upon that.
Now, why does, if it's close, matter? Because what most secretaries of state don't say too often and out loud is that oftentimes provisional votes and votes that come in by mail after the day of the election are not counted for a while because the balance of difference in the races is such that those ballots wouldn't have made any difference anyways. The race has been decided by such significant margins that they're not counted until a slower walkthrough process. All right, so that's why the sense of the volume, the closeness comes in. But at this stage in the game, I think that most races are going to be considered so close and the volume is so high, they're not going to have that luxury.
Yeah, question from Minnesota. A judge recently ruled that ballots are okay to be postmarked up to November 3rd because Minnesota changed their state law to say that. Some people challenge that law and say, no, they shouldn't be allowed up till Election Day. The person asks, are there any federal laws regarding that, or are those all governed by the states?
That's a very tricky situation because it's got to be state law.
Right.
Because the states are responsible for conducting their election.
Yes.
Congress has certain control over certain rules for federal elections, but that's not one of them. And so that's given to the states. And so now, but it's not to say that a challenge of that wouldn't end up in a federal court because it would impact a federal election.
A question regarding polling. There's a lot of polls out there from the mainstream media. Do you believe in polls, and what do you think of the ones that have come out?
What do you think about polls?
I used to always say the only poll that mattered was the one that was on Election Day, but now I'm going to say the only poll that matters is the one we find out about 3 weeks after Election Day.
Because voting has started in many states.
Yeah, voting started in many states. And I think when you look at polls, how many people are... I mean, everyone that I know is always honest and tells the truth online. So when they receive an online poll, they would never lie about it or mislead in any way. So, I mean, polls, you and I could create a poll right now to say the sun is shining in the Eastern time zone and that today is Friday, and get people to answer in the affirmative to that question. So that's the one thing about polls. You have to dive in. You have to look at the exact question that was asked. You have to look at who was polled. You have to look at the methodology. I mean, it's a hundreds of millions of dollars business.
Another law of unintended consequences with the death of journalism that's happened in our country. It was a process that's taken a number of years, but many people in this business feel that about 2016, journalism died, and really what we've got is zombie journalism now. It's just The Walking Dead. It's horrid. It just smells like death. It's just not live. It's not honest. Part of that death of journalism began when media companies began to do the polling. When that first came along, a bunch of us said, "Wait a minute, you're the news, but you're commissioning the poll, and then your poll leads the news. It leads your news program." Didn't you just create the news? Kinda. That's a problem. But what's even more problematic today is these polls are used as news, but they don't tell you who was polled. They don't tell you how they were polled. They don't tell you whether they were registered voters or likely voters, or people who had voted last time, or people who are insistent that they're going to vote, or whether it was an online poll, or whether it was a cell phone poll, or whether it was and they don't tell you the percentage. Does the percentage of people polled in your state match the voter registration in your state? Or is it oversampled in one direction or another? Is it oversampled regionally? Is it oversampled economically? To understand a poll takes at least an hour of research into the pieces and parts that make up that poll. And if you don't have the hard numbers on the background of what the poll is, how do you rightly interpret it? So and then there's one other thing. Because of the death of journalism, people view polling as media, and they don't like the media, so they're not talking to pollsters.
Well, you're not talking to pollsters, and I mean, who do you know that answers the phone when they don't know who's calling them in the beginning? So there's not many people that are willing to take calls.
So how objective is it?
Yeah,
and that's why they have been wrong a lot, not because they're not trying hard, but because people aren't participating. A poll is based upon the idea that if you call somebody and ask them to give you their opinion, A, they will, and B, they'll tell you what they honestly think or feel, and those days are gone. It may be that polling has actually outworn its welcome in America.
Next question. How can Congress elect a new president if there's ballots remaining that are all in question?
Because the Constitution gives them the authority to do it. The seat cannot remain empty, at least according to law. Now, if Congress chooses to not do their job, and we don't have a president that they select, then we don't have a president.
The question is, would that be a temporary position? Would, once the ballots are certified in those states, would that president then be allowed to serve out that term? Or is it
the president is an acting president and has no term until, according to the Constitution, until we have a qualified presidential ticket.
So
at which point in time that person, that ticket becomes the president and vice president. So it's a temporary job.
It's a temporary job. So
what if they never resolve the conflict?
Well, what if they never resolve the conflict? We could ask that question. Or, as some have mentioned, maybe if it's chosen as this, say they choose the Speaker of the House, or through succession they say that's the easiest path. The Speaker of the House, you can't hold Speaker of the House and President of the United States at the same time.
Well, you can't even, as Speaker of the House, hold that's right, the acting presidency. You're right. So the Constitution requires that the Speaker has to resign from the House and from the speakership to become acting president. So that leaves a vacancy in Congress.
That leaves a vacancy, which they would most likely politically maybe leave open until it's resolved and then give them their. Who knows?
Who knows?
What?
But what's
Isn't
important
this fun?
to understand is that the rumor mill that says Donald Trump wouldn't leave the White House in a situation where he would just stay. No, the Constitution does not permit that to happen. In multiple places, it doesn't permit it, and Congress wouldn't let that happen, and the courts wouldn't let that happen.
You know, I shake my head when I think of that transfer of power because both sides play, the left plays upon what President Trump has said about leaving the office, but then Hillary Clinton has said to Joe Biden, don't concede under any circumstances, and the left is still talking about Stacey Abrams in Georgia in 2016. I mean, they both angle at each other, but then they both put their hands up and say we would never do that.
Hey, I hadn't thought about this, but is that a fly on his head? Sorry, I digress. Okay,
let's attracted to the gray hair apparently.
Okay, so now summary. What have we learned? We've learned that there's a whole arena of law that you have to go behind the curtain to find, but it's there. These are circumstances that were not anticipated. These are unintended consequences that shouldn't be upon us, but they are. And now we have to make sure that our expectations are such. So the bottom line is, that's why everyone should go and vote in person. No, that's not what we're saying. That might be a way to take the pressure off of the boards of elections and take the pressure off of the counting process. So I'm not suggesting that's a bad idea. But what we don't want people to think is if you can't go in person, then don't bother to vote. No, you have to vote in the way that is best for you, that is safest for you, and that you feel the most confident that your vote will be counted. But please, we're not going to scream at the camera, and I pray you won't scream at your television or your computer screen saying the answer is just show up in person. That does help. That does help the process at every level. But some people can't, and if you can't or you simply won't, please vote in whatever way your state permits you to do so.
One question asked about the mass mailing of ballots.
Right.
You know, in some states, they just mail everyone a ballot.
Yeah, that's the live ballot scenario, and I think that that's where you're going to see the biggest amount of lawyering up. That is really baiting people to either make mistakes or take advantage. When states mail out live ballots and then they're sitting there waiting to be filled out. Most states, for an absentee ballot or a mail-in ballot, require that you go through a step-by-step process where you're continually identified each step along the way.
Well, I think about the federal government, and I think about the stimulus package from the spring, and people received.
I hate when you tell this story.
$1,200 or family $2,400, depending on children. But we know of instances where people that have passed away received the money. It was put into bank accounts. They were mailed checks. That happened. The federal government, the government in general, can't give money away correctly. So I'm not sure we should be mailing ballots to everyone.
What was the joke you told today about somebody that you knew who was a liberal who died?
A buddy told me.
Can we tell this on television?
Yeah, I think so. A buddy told me that his grandfather had never voted for a liberal for president until this year. The problem is his grandfather passed away 3 years ago.
Okay, it was funny, so I guess you had to be there. Okay. All right, so where are we now? What can we do? First thing is, please share this information with people that you know and people that you love so that they can also reset their expectations and be careful and cautious in how we vote to make certain that you feel that you are safe and that your vote is being safely handled. So let's not judge anybody in advance, but let's rightly discern the situation that we're in, because the situation that we're in, there are people trying to warn us, people trying to tell us this could get weird. The other thing is that we need to be careful to not be manipulated on election night, because I can already feel the New York Times doing it, the way they set their charts up. It kind of looks like a little gambling thing there, where they're saying like, okay, so if we tell you about this state, this state, this state, like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to look at the 270 to win map from last time around, which, by the way, 270 to win you can get at
great site.
iVoters.com.
Go to 270 to win. You can play on them.
Right down, scroll down a little bit, you'll find it right there. All right. So you go to 271. What they're going to do is they're going to say, okay, based on what we had last time and what we see on the counts today, look, these states that have come in, they got their homework done early. Look at what's happening in Arizona. Looking at what's happening in Wisconsin. And since those states look like candidate X is going to win, we can know for certain that this candidate's in the lead.
Well, I can remember on election night in 2016 sitting in the studio, and I can remember the polls in Michigan closed. And I believe it was the Detroit Free Press. If it wasn't, I apologize for using that, but I believe it was them that immediately declared the winner Hillary Clinton of the state of Michigan. I mean, polls closed, a minute later they declared it, which happens in a number of states that they think are safe. But then ballots started coming in and results started coming in. Everyone's looking like, that number shouldn't be that close. Mm-hmm. What's going on here?
I remember the back and forth.
Yeah,
you were doing Cleveland, I was doing Nashville.
Yeah, don't allow the media one way or another. Wait until everything comes in on election night. We'll have our cheat sheets. We'll be updating stuff, and we'll be looking at the amount of ballots that were cast in 2016, 2018 compared to 2020, and we'll be able to look and give answers of what's happening from the coverage we'll be doing. But don't allow them to move you one way or another and think they know everything right from the beginning, because it could be a process.
Yeah, it's going to take some time. So it's important that we are keenly aware of what's going on. So send this information to people. Vote the right way, the safe way. And only once. Okay? Don't try anything but what the law directs, because that would be a disaster. We just wouldn't even go there. All right? But now, how can we help people with voting? And let's go for the last few minutes of our conversation to iVoters. Here it is on the screen. This is actually a live site. And what you see is, first off, what is this? This is the result of work that started in 1980 that was, for the first 6 years that we did voting information, we actually did printed voting materials that we sent out. And after 6 years, it was millions of pages. And there was only a few of us dragging these bulk mailing bags, all right, Newman style, all right, dragging them to the post office day after day after day. We had a series of printers that actually kept these things going. I mean, like this printer could do this much of it. The volume was so huge. Well, 1986, we said, man, we got to come up with a better way of doing this. And so we began to try to figure out how to make changes. By the time we got to 1998, the digital world had so revolutionized everything that we took this site online. And we did a very difficult thing because people were used to having paper in their hands. And it meant a lot. And people supported that paper project. And because they did, it gave us the volume, the revenue, if you will, to be able to print. Of course, it was every dollar that came in went right back out to the post office or to the printers. There was no profit, involved. But what we ended up with was a situation where we went online. Today, this is a result of a site from 1998. Every 2 years, it's been revolutionized, it's been recreated. We've had a number of designers in it. I'll tell you about ivoters.com. The reason that Dr. Fred from the iVoter Lab says it's elementary is because we won't let go of the blackboard. Why? Because we want you to feel like we feel when we vote. We all feel like it's grade school, right? I mean, none of us went and got a degree in voting. And you vote, and then you forget about it for a year. You go vote, and you forget about it for another year. Every 2 years, it seems more important because of the bigger races. Every 4 years, it's like, wow, this is really important. But you always feel like a kid, like you're never on top of it. So we're not trying to get everybody to be an expert. We're trying to get people to the next step.
Yeah, and that's why we've created the site the way we have. And that's why, you talk about it being elementary, but also it can be a bit intimidating when you step in there and you see the choices, and this allows you to do your homework before you step in there.
But you knocked this out in 15 minutes, right? This is easy.
No, 15 minutes. There was a team working hard behind the scenes on
how many races?
Building spreadsheet. There's tens of thousands of candidates all across the country. I mean, because we had states set up for
behind
primary,
this little blackboard,
behind that
are
little
tens
blackboard,
of thousands of candidates.
Rachel Poles, who's at Grove City College, she can attest to that. She helped build many of those Excel sheets, and Patty and Melanie and Anna and Sue and Sherry and the entire team. Yes, there are a lot, and when there's errors, I get emails saying, "Hey, so and so's picture's missing."
Since 1998, this site has been down very few minutes. I won't give you the specifics because I don't want to jinx anything, but it has been down very fast. It has high levels of security, high levels of duplication and redundancy. But the most important thing to understand is this is one of the few places in the political process where nobody's making any money from doing it or trying to.
I told that story today to a gentleman that you and I were with, and regarding we did the Public Square live from Media Row in 2016 at the Republican National Convention.
It's a great
and the
story.
gentleman I was with today was asking me a lot of questions about iVoters, and I laughed and I said, well, let me tell you a story about 2016 and we were having breakfast, you, Alan, and I, at a little diner, and there was a consultant, and
You had the better breakfast, as I remember.
yeah, you did.
You did, yeah.
There was a consultant there, and he was asking, we were telling him about iVoters, and it just baffled him because we weren't data mining addresses, we weren't looking for information, and he kept saying, how do you make money off the site? And
How do you monetize that?
Yeah, where's the ads? Well, we don't put ads on the site. Why are you doing it? Where's the money to be made on the site? We're like, we don't make any money on the site. We feel the Republic operates at its best when the most people are involved and educated about the decisions that they're making. So that's why we do this.
What we find is that the biggest reason people don't vote is because they don't have their homework done. And so they're concerned that they don't want to go and mess it up because voting is important. People take voting seriously. And so iVoters helps people get their homework done. It is a one-stop shop that can give you so much information for free. Now, nowhere on this site are we going to tell you who to vote for, nor are we going to try to lead you towards such a conclusion.
No, not at all. We provide no endorsements of our own. There are a list of political action committees and endorsements.
PAC organization endorsements. Click there.
You can click on there and you can see people on the left, people on the right, people down the middle, who they are supporting. That's a tool to allow you to do homework for yourself and say, well, wait a minute. I don't agree with this organization and they're supporting this candidate, or I do agree with this organization. I want to know who they're behind, because the U.S. Senate's a perfect example. There's 100 seats in the U.S. Senate. Dave refers to them the most exclusive club in the world.
Yep, the Club of 100.
The Club of 100. every one of those Senate races impacts everyone watching this today because it counts as one vote, whether it's in your state or not. So a lot of people want to do homework so they can know who to support around the country.
So you'll be able to go and get the endorsements. When you go to iVoters and you put in your address and your zip code, that's all. We don't ask you for your name. You come in anonymous and you leave anonymous. And none of that data, even as sparse as it is gathered up and sold to anyone. There's no clickbait. There's no social media connection. This is not getting to Facebook. This is not getting to Google. This is you're in, you're out, it's yours. When you punch in this information, the races come up that you're going to see on your ballot so that you're not wasting time having to go through pages and pages and pages. And you don't have to know what your districts are. You don't have to know their names. You will when you get done, but we've already done that homework for you.
And there are a number of states. I can think of Illinois. I can think of Florida that have ballot issues this year, statewide ballot issues. Those appear as well. You can do your homework, do some research on those.
Florida's got 6 ballot
Florida
issues.
has 6.
And people go, oh, hang on. It doesn't take that long. You can read them all in advance, make up your mind, make a note on whether you're yes or no, and then it's done. You go to vote and you got it. You absolutely got it. People will be amazed. The people who do iVoters vote faster than anybody else in the country. So if you're concerned about long lines and vote counts, use iVoters because you'll be able to vote faster.
Create a cheat sheet.
That's
what
it.
I do.
It's legal.
Create a cheat sheet. Go in. One of the things I do as well, I take my children with me every opportunity I get to vote because I don't want it to be an intimidating process for when they have the opportunity to vote for the first time. I think it's great to see young people involved and see the process firsthand.
So, iVoters, and why the puppets cartoon? Why the puppet commercials? Well, because we want kids to know that it's elementary, that it's part of what we all do, it's part of what being an American's all about. And it is simple. It's just something that we all do. So, iVoters now, you can talk to anybody you want about iVoters. You can send a site to everybody. It works all throughout the United States of America. It doesn't cost you a dime. You're not putting anybody at risk. You'll also find that it keeps you out of a lot of arguments because this is an election that continues to accelerate to a polarization that feels like you're in a worldview debate. It seems like, wow, there's people that are way far apart. Well, if you don't want an argument about that, just go right there to party platforms and say to people, look, hey, I'm not going to argue with you. Here's the 2020 Democratic platform, here's the Republican platform, and here's the Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force recommendations, and there's the Libertarian Party platform. Go ahead and take a look for yourself, decide which side you want to be on. I'm not going to argue with you. You know, the facts are there.
We talked about an argument. I drove past, in a neighborhood the other day, I drove past a set of condos, and it's a set of condos where they share a wall, and there's a unit on each side. And up against the one property line, there was a Trump sign, and about as close as you get to that was a Biden-Harris sign. So I thought, Trump, Pence, Biden, I thought they must have amazing conversations. I mean,
I've been in neighborhoods where it's crystal clear that the ones, it's like they've got all their Halloween decorations up, and then they're pointing their presidential election signs exactly at the person across the street who's got the opposite sign. It's like you feel it out there, and it is everywhere. This is a site that avoids that kind of confrontation. You just go to iVoters and people make up their own minds.
Well, and remember, we're voting for a lot more things this year than just the President of the United States. Don't let that become a distraction, and don't let that keep you from doing your homework and saying, I just want to go vote for one candidate or the other.
Well, and the last President of the United States started off as a state senator. So how important are state legislative races?
Yes, they're very important because people are going to work their way up the ladder. And the more you get to know those folks, the better off we'll be because we'll be putting, if we love our neighbor, we care who serves in civil authority over our neighbor.
Well, you can make a case that the election that's really more important than the presidency right now is for control of the United States Senate. That is a situation where right now Republicans have a 5-vote majority. And if they, it's
53-47.
53-47. So they have 5-vote majority. So in essence, if they lose 3 seats
and the
White House, then you end up in a situation where the Democrats take control. So those Senate seats are very, very important. What's likely to happen there? It's way too soon to know. There's a very important race in Alabama that looks like a Republican is going to capture a Democrat seat. So that changes the size of the hill for the Democrats to get up. But right now, Democrats are leading in the polls in many of those other races.
Yeah, you're going to look at, people are going to watch closely in Colorado and Arizona. There's a
In
very
Maine?
important Maine,
North Carolina.
North Carolina. There's a very important race in Michigan. There are a number of states. Georgia, in essence, has two
Yeah.
that are coming up. One on election day, November 3rd, and then one that's a primary runoff on that day for the second seat in Georgia.
So, who do you know in Michigan? Who do you know in Colorado? Who do you know in Maine, in some of these key states? That's a great way to send iVoters to them to help their network of associates gain access to this. Why? Because when iVoters comes into the hands of folks and they haven't made up their mind about these Senate races, they can go on and decide for themselves. Now, iVoters is not going to tell them who to vote for, but it will give them. I mean, we get right down to the fact where a large number of these campaigns, these big campaigns, you've got their Twitter feeds.
Yeah, I was going to say that's one of the things we're not proponents of social media, but some candidates say a little too much on there or not enough, and their Twitter handle is listed. If they have a Twitter handle, you can click on that when you look up your candidates on ivoters.com, and you can see what they've been saying. And many candidates use that as a way to speak directly to the people. You know what? I think it's been said President Trump has used Twitter once or twice, I believe.
So here's what's happening. You're looking at the revolution. You're looking at the way that people will be deciding how to vote for years and years to come, not dependent upon a media that is so polarized that we're facing the death of journalism at every hand, not solely dependent upon political parties or candidates or campaigns, but fast, secure, free, nonpartisan ways of getting the information so that you know it's on your ballot, but then you can become a change agent that influences hundreds, maybe thousands of voters in helping them make the best decision based on the facts. And that's how we debunk the system, by overwhelming it with real facts and with people who really care. So you're looking at the revolution right here. And we'll be here no matter what this particular election year brings us. So we have a tradition of starting on time. We have a tradition of ending early. Is there one last question?
We had a couple more questions just regarding election law, and I think it's important to stress that election laws are covered by state laws. There's federal guidelines, constitutional things that we talked about, but state law is what covers the election law in each state as far as how late ballots can be received, when they're going to start processing them.
You'll find out that information online easiest. And then if you have any questions, go to your Secretary of State office, go online, get the phone number, call them, they'll answer your questions for you. Rob, thank you. Alan, thank you. Thanks to the whole team at the American Policy Roundtable, the Public Square Radio Network, and iVoters.com. And we are going to say good night until we meet again, most likely before November 3rd.